Welcome to the Women Arise podcast, where you'll hear firsthand stories from around the world of women working together to overcome challenges they face.
Welcome to the Women Arise podcast. I'm Neelley Hicks, and I'm really excited to have our guest today with me, Dr. Revi Sterling. And Revi is the director of the USAID W-GDP WomenConnect Challenge. I'm so excited to talk with you, Revi. How are you?
Hey, Neelley. I'm so honored to be on this podcast. You know, you're one of my favorite change makers in the world. So when you asked me to be a part of this is a huge deal for me. So thank you.
Aw, makes me feel good. Well, it's Mutual Admiration Society. So, you've spent your life working on the gender digital divide, looking at how women across the world are not treated equitably when it comes down to having the right technology, having the same technology as guys are afforded. And so when we started looking at who could speak about gender digital divide, I knew that you would be the best person. And so I want you to give us an update and just tell us, how are we still not effectively closing the gender digital divide? And if you could tell our listeners a little bit more about what it actually is.
Sure, I'd absolutely love to, and don't let me talk too long, because I could go on for about 25 years, because that's about as long as I've worked on this, and and I've got lots of thoughts to share. But in essence, the gender digital divide is just really the haves and have-nots of who has access to and use of digital technology. So that's anything from cell phones to internet access, the stuff that we take for granted, but also which is a huge kind of gender and technology gap in a lot of places around the world, mostly places that have more strict social norms, where people in power, and that can be men or women or tribes or castes or religious groups or employers, etc., whoever's in charge really doesn't want those who are not in charge to be empowered with information. And information is the key of information technology. This is the currency now that we use to communicate everything in our lives. And for some reason, that is a terribly challenging, threatening premise, to a lot of people that see women as less than, as chattel, as property. If you just look at the UN Development Program's annual Human Development Report that just came out last week, it shows that 90% of the world has biases against women. That's 90% of the population. So there's a lot of women included in that as well as men. Just today over lunch, and here in lovely liberal DC, a table of women next to me was talking about how Elizabeth Warren could never be elected because it's only, really a country should be run by men. And it's just, this isn't our own. And I'm like, do I jump in on something? What do I do here? So, there's a lot of gender bias out there. There's a lot of gender and bias stereotypes still, obviously, that we're up against all the time. And that obviously manifests itself in technology use and access, just like it manifests itself in women's and humans' rights, in all aspects of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so interesting what you overheard. And, I think that we have it here in the United States so much, this gender digital divide, if you just look at IT departments.
Oh, absolutely. When I started in and I'm not going to talk about when I started in tech, but it was a while ago. The only way to be accepted was to sort of outguy the guys, because it was such a male bastion. And I hear from, there's a lot that's changed at the big technology industries, a lot changed at the big companies, but that's been the result of major interventions and or lawsuits and or Me Too movement. And there's still a long way to go, because I still mentor a lot of young women who say, oh my gosh, I still have to be a guy to get ahead in tech, or I still have to be degendered. And that's just such, a crime against our own nature.
It is. I see in my work a lot of the discrimination against women in other countries. I know one time a group of men were asked if they would allow their wife to use their phone because they didn't have their own phone. And they said, yes, she can use. But then when the person asking the question said, but what if she wants to take it with her? And then man said, no, 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 no.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I mean, there's there's close to 1 billion women, who have never accessed anything online, using a phone, using a computer, using anything, and most of it has to do with the fact that they live in families or communities that do not want them to be empowered. Yeah, and that's where we have to change, and that's what really the thing we have to change is working with exactly that group of men to understand, well, under what conditions would you let her have her own phone? And if they say never, then we need to start there. And that's where, like, a lot of the projects that I work with, the WomenConnect Challenge really is all about this. It's looking at these kind of social norms and cultural barriers. Because it used to be that we used to think that, there's this gender digital divide because phones are too expensive, and we know women don't make enough to own a phone or get the right connectivity. But a lot of it, if we know, you and I both know a lot of very poor women that manage to have phones and get them charged up, but they're the ones that have some agency and some ability to use this. And this is really about the 1 billion plus women that are prohibited mostly because of social norms. So working with those husbands to say, well, if you were choking, wouldn't you want her to be able to use your phone to? Oh, well, of course I would. And then you go, well, how about recipes? Our children's health is a great thing to lead by. Prayer times. What direction is Mecca? When is Easter this year? What if I can't go to church? I mean, I really think that there's, I'm not trying to leverage religion in a lot of this, but because it's such an important factor in people's lives, and it's as digitized as everything else is, like agriculture and health and education, it's honestly a way in a lot of communities to let women start using phones.
Yeah, true. Can you give any examples of a woman who was brought into digital development and saw improvement in her and her family's lives?
Oh, I mean, so many, but like one that just is germane to what I was talking about. We've got a project in northern Nigeria in Kano, and we've been working with conservative clerics and husbands to create use cases for women to use phones. And these are in families that, when we started this project about a year and a half ago, said, we're very much against any sort of women's technology use. This was forbidden. This falls in these areas where there's a lot of Boko Haram activity, and we know that Boko Haram is pretty much, verbatim against women having any access to Western ideology, Western technology, Western information. And what's more Western than a smartphone, apparently, even though they're global. What they represent is women's freedom and equity and choice and all the things that this community doesn't really abide. And then working with clerics, husbands, first wives, often the ones that have a lot of power in their community, to understand that, yes, the internet can be a really dangerous, scary place. And if you're really worried about women's morality, which was their main argument, was, there's a moral content out there, and this is going to corrupt people. There's a lot of things we can do, both at the software and hardware and even policy level, to prohibit that kind of content. But at the end of the day, holding a woman able to say, that is not appropriate, I've learned that this isn't, but we're going to use it for these things instead. And they started using it with their husbands. I'm thinking of one family right now that I'm going to be interviewing in about 2 weeks in Nigeria, where this husband just had absolutely no phones in the house, not for the women. The men can have them, the sons can, girls cannot. They're too easily manipulated online. They're too easy to, they don't have the moral compass that men have. But he started using phones with girls. He has 4 wives and about 16 daughters, and they all started using it together just in the service of the daughter's homework. So it was a structured environment. And then the father's like, oh my God, this is really interesting. And I mean, it started with like looking at biology homework, and then it led to whales. And his father had never heard of a whale before, and neither had anybody else in the house. But they started getting on Wikipedia and looking at whales. And next thing, they're playing whale noises. I mean, this is an odd, kind of a bit of a segue. But the father understood that by limiting the access to information, he was limiting all the access to good information as well as bad. And so it started off with structured internet at home sessions. And then it got to the point where he's like, I trust my daughters and wives enough that they can do this themselves. And now they have full reign. He actually bought them phones. This is somebody's 16 phones, 17, 20 phones. This is somebody that, 18 months ago said absolutely not. So, yes, is that only one family? But we're working with, in that case, 75 families. And if we have a kind of conversion rate of even 50% in that case, it's making a huge difference in just the family dynamics between dads and daughters and husbands and wives, and building trust and realizing that information is good for the family if it's the right information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so important. You reminded me of a family in northern Nigeria. One of our women in the Women Arise Collective, Doris, lives in Gombe.
Okay.
And so she was speaking at a big women's event, and one of the people associated with us had a phone and was reporting on what happened at the event, learned that one of the women in the crowd had a daughter who had been raped and had contracted HIV, which turned into AIDS, and she was near death. And her name was Ladidi, which means Sunday. And anyway, the family had really been shunned by community. It was really horrific. And I learned that a couple of days later, after that interview, Ladidi died. And the reporter, Daniel, went to the funeral, and he saw that even in death, she was stigmatized. People were not coming. They were not showing up like others would normally show up at a funeral. And so I said, well, what if we did some use of social media to send sympathy to the parents? And so we were able to do that and get notes of consolation and sympathy from around the world. And then I put it in a Word doc. Daniel printed it, brought it on motorbike to Ladidi's parents. And Margaret said that it just meant so much to her that while the people in her own community were not caring for her, that there were all these other people in the outside world who were remembering them. So it's incredible.
Really, this is that's so you also. You have the biggest heart I know of anybody, and you see where the extension of technology can reach across the miles. And this is one of those wonderful things that we can do with information communication technologies. It's not just, TikTok and gaming and all the things that these husbands and brothers and fathers don't want their family to do, but it is this. You made a huge difference in that family.
Yeah.
And I do think, if we're able to really focus on that networked effect, I think that's huge. It reminds me, and we know that, rape is so commonplace that it's ridiculous that anyone would feel, first of all, it's ridiculous that it's just as commonplace as it is, but also that anyone would feel stigmatized by rape and then a subsequent, STD. I couldn't believe it. Another project we have in northern India, the rate of rape and gender-based violence is so great in that community, but they don't talk about it amongst themselves. Absolutely, for their own stigma reasons, but they also had no idea that other women outside their community faced this. So it was very interesting to meet with them so they can anonymize their voices and talk about this in kind of a call-in, radio, internet, type technology where they can share their stories, and they can be like, first of all, it's not just me. Oh my gosh, that's relieving, yet terrible, yet now we can collectivize, now we can take some action. If there's two of us, we can go to the mayor and maybe he'll believe us. He won't believe one woman. Oh gosh, now there's 27 of us. And then one of the biggest things they asked me was, well, in America, do men ever beat women? And that's a really interesting moment, because I said, well, yes. And they just couldn't believe it. And they said, well, in France, do they? In Africa, do they? And it was just having that conversation, which was a depressing conversation, of course, but one of those things that could lead to, oh my gosh, this is a much bigger issue than us. There are organizations out there that can help us. There are things we can do, and that's really where the power is. And you can see why people are terrified of that power. People who are on the opposite side of that, the people that are going to be named and shamed. But this changes the lives of the women directly, maybe changes the entire system for their kids that grow up and their kids' kids. So absolutely. And I'd love to find out what happened to the family in Gombe on what happened after they got all those messages. Did that change the next case that happened?
It's time for a follow-up, for sure. Yeah, because he also brought the phone in and brought his phone into their home, and I spoke to the parents by phone. Right. And so with some of the community present, to know that someone from the United States was calling to express sympathy, I think that also would raise the people up in their community standing, just because people tend to think like the United States is this amazing place where like important people live. Not that I'm important, but I would think that it would make a difference. So we need a follow-up story for sure.
I think we do. I think there's so many follow-up stories out there where women's networks like Women Arise and Global World Pulse and other programs that, may have a very specific aim or even just a larger community focus, where you hear things like, wow, this happens in Cameroon. Well, it also happens in Dominican Republic. Oh, and what did you do about it? Or I'm running for office in Yemen. Well, I ran for office in Massachusetts. Let me tell you. I mean, yes, we have so many differences, but at the end of the day, nobody builds coalition like women when we need to. Now, we're also pretty terrible with each other when we achieve our goals and sort of turn on each other, but that's a different podcast for a different day. When it comes to coalition building and manifesting movements, I mean, we are key. We are tops.
Yes, we are. Well, so tell me, what do effective partnerships look like to address this issue?
I think the biggest thing is, when I look at a lot of just gender and empowerment programs, be them tech, be it around, other issues, gathering water, voting, going to school, anything really. I see a lot of programs that tend to focus just on the women themselves and helping them, telling them to build their self-esteem and build up their agency and all, be brave and be bold. And you can't do that outside of the larger system change, because then you're actually putting women at risk. You're putting them at risk of stigmatization. You're putting them at risk of shame, of bucking against a culture. So, it's really key, to work with those that that are the disbelievers in women's empowerment, and there, and see what that's rooted in. What is the fear of a woman being more powerful than she currently is? What if that translated to bringing in additional funding for the family? And that could be, we see this a lot with men, that's a sore spot. That shows that they don't, they're unable to provide, right? We hear a lot of that, like, I don't want my woman working outside of the house. Everyone will think I'm a bad provider. Well, it's not that you're a bad provider. It's that the climate has changed and the economy has changed. And you had a hurricane last week and you lost your crops, or a million other things that could be changing in the world. Or maybe your wife just really wants to work. Maybe she's a fabulous tailor and she knows she has skills and she wants to be fulfilled. So how do we flip the narrative with men and others in power to say, actually, this doesn't show that you're a poor provider. This shows that you're a really cool husband that's, bringing in more money than your neighbors. That you're able to go ahead and get that indoor plumbing or latrine or television or send your kids to school because you and your wife are this partnership. And so it's really tough to change the narrative, but in every community, and I say this with some confidence, of 25 years, I've never found a community where there wasn't at least one person, that wasn't willing to take a chance and at least discuss this. And sometimes they say, it's way too early for this community to talk about this. Can we talk in a few years? Okay, I will be back. And then I come back and they're like, I think we're ready. There's 3 guys here that are willing to let their wives work. They're not going to do it as an individual, but they might do it as a group of men. They might do it as a family. They might do it if the chief does it. So you find these little weaknesses in these kind of patriarchal, homogenous cultures. And you find the people that are willing to say, I'll try it. And maybe it's through incentives, which a lot of people, balk and say, oh, it's not sustainable, or you're just you're giving out, you're paying for good behavior, but a lot of it becomes a psychological change after a while. It's that whole things get habitual. And all of a sudden you find that things are slowly better at the home front and there's less tension and it works better when there's more money coming in. And that seems to outweigh the fact that your cousin down the street thinks you're a bad provider. Your cousin down the street might eventually come by and say, interesting, I see that you now have, a flushing toilet in your house. I want one of those. How did you get that? Well, I let my wives work and we pool our resources and we do this. Or I let my daughter go to school and she learned about the sanitation and hygiene in a course. So, I think there's a lot more about attraction rather than promotion that we have to play on here. And it's hard. Most development initiatives, most community initiatives, you have a timeline. Maybe kids have, you've got 3 months to go do something, or a church or community group has 6 weeks to go to X country and put up a school or put in a bridge or that kind of stuff. And so, but these are very arbitrary timelines for people that have lived in these kind of, cultures for thousands of years, at least hundreds of years. And we have to be on their time as opposed to the other time around. You can't go in and you can't go in and push cultural change as your agenda. You've got to find where it makes sense for them. And then you have to watch them negotiate this and build this. And then you get out of the way. And then you support and you support and you support. But in some communities I've worked in, it's taken 15, 16 years to see some sea changes. But at the end of the day, these are sustainable, gender equitable changes.
Well, I think one thing that Americans, and I'm sure other cultures, don't realize is that the mobile phone is not just a place for people to get online, but it's also a bank. It's a way to get access to money, to be able to save money, to have mobile money that pays bills and all of those things. It just opens up.
Absolutely. And so many women, it used to be that, okay, we think that women are lifted out of poverty and they can, lifted out of poverty and can help reduce poverty loads in their family and communities with mobile banking. And now we really, really see that mobile money and digital financial services, which are things like loans, they're things like reinvestments, they're things like group investments, savings groups, that kind of stuff, not just individual money accounts. I think we can say there's irrefutable evidence now to say that it is a very powerful poverty alleviation strategy in places where women are able to own and use phones. And mostly I work with the women that aren't able to own or use the phone, but eventually when you get to the position where they can, then, mobile money is pretty much the first thing and kind of the gateway application to other services and internet applications and use, because once women get their own money, and I've heard this worldwide, they have a say. That financial empowerment piece is absolutely key. I've worked in so many communities where the women go, I don't care about the vote, I don't care about FGM, I don't care about that kind of stuff. I just need my own money. Because once I have my own money, no one can tell me what to do, including husbands, including family members, including children. And the nice thing about mobile money and all these digital financial services is no one has to know you have it. Right? You can share it with people, but unlike putting something under your mattress or putting it in a coffee can or that kind of stuff, this is yours. It's yours to manage. It's yours to actually figure out what you want to do with. And I've seen a lot of women build up savings accounts where then they can leverage that into a very different life for themselves, which is also a huge threat to people that don't think women should be able to own money or property or that kind of stuff. To come home one day and have your wife say, I'm done with this, I have enough money that I can get a bus ticket, divorce you, and leave, is a terrifying concept, except if you're that woman. And then you realize, wow, you have your whole life ahead of you. And that's a traumatic case. But, a lot of women that join these mobile money programs, etc., they get access to they're able to save money in ways that we just take for granted. Being able to save up school fees so that they're banked and with a school, so that when it comes time to send your kids to school and you don't have the fees because there's been a marriage or a bad harvest or a funeral or something super expensive, you've got that. It's a kind of an insurance policy. So women are able to make really smart decisions about money that impact their whole families.
Yes. And last year, we experienced the impact of being able to transfer money to a mobile phone and save somebody's life.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, this
And these are places where people
taking
go,
a
why
job.
don't you do mobile money on your phone? Well, we work in a place, we're lucky in the U.S. that there's FDIC insurance for our bank transactions and that kind of stuff, but a lot of these people can't ever open a bank account. They're deemed credit unworthy, or they're
True.
so far away from a bank that they can't, or they don't trust the banks because, there's a run on the bank. They're never going to be able to access their money, or it's a corrupt system that has no insurance. But being able to transfer money, absolutely. I mean, that is a huge lifesaver in communities, especially in places where there'd be no other way to get money to somebody else. Absolutely not. If your child is in school in another part of the country, what are you going to do? Give a bus driver some money and say, "I hope this makes it to my kid"? No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incredible what that has done, like, for global community, because it makes the world so much smaller when women are digitized and they're part of a network where they can not only use the mobile phone for banking, but they can also use it to transfer messages of health when there's disease, when there's outbreaks of cholera, and they can tell one another to boil water. Or they can tell people in a particular region near them to avoid a certain location where violence has broken out. It's a life-saving device, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even when I first started doing this work, and I built it was kind of pre-cell phone age. So I built a communications device that let women talk not in real time, but close enough. They were able to, I mean, this was many, many years ago, and they were able to warn each other about an unscrupulous, corn dealer that was selling poisonous corn and had already, 3 kids had already died, and, lots more. And this was just in a very isolated area in Eastern Africa. And without that, I mean, that was proof positive even back, a long time ago that, I mean, first of all, women are the keepers of community information, especially when it comes to health and education and tradition. They're the trusted members with this information, and we also tend to talk a lot. And if there's one good way of getting a message out, it's one woman with, who's able to text, 20 people in her circle who can turn it around and do the same.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. What can we do to really emphasize that this is an issue that needs to be taken seriously?
I think one of the things, it ebbs and flows. I mean, sort of women's empowerment ebbs and flows, as we know, over the last few decades. Anyhow, it usually takes sort of a crisis, be it Me Too or maybe a big funding promise from an administration, and then people are like, oh, that's important, I guess. And then sort of gets relegated, like, we call women's empowerment sort of an evergreen topic. I mean, it's always on the table. Women have never fully experienced, full equity. So, is there any real new news in this space? And I think that what I've seen a lot of in this gender digital divide space is sort of a fickleness about funding. And back about, I'd say 2007 to 2012, all the big high-tech players had major, major programs to close the gender digital divides because they were starting to see that a lot more men than women had phones. And this wasn't good from, a market standpoint and a user standpoint, but also from an equity and fairness standpoint, from a human development standpoint. And Microsoft, Intel, HP, everybody put so much money into this, and now all those funds have really dried to just a little tiny trickle because they didn't see a big return on investment. They didn't see a lot of women adopt cell phone and internet services. And so they go, well, it must be the women. I guess these communities aren't ready for it, blah, 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 blah. It's not the women. It's the fact that all of these organizations and big donor agencies, USAID, DFID, CEDA, World Bank, all the foundations went into the very tech approach, which is do coding camps, do digital literacy, all the stuff that makes sense to us, mostly white, mostly Western, users of technology. Of course, you need to be trained on it in order to use it, except that this didn't make sense to any of the women. Most of the women they were trying to train, because what is learning Excel and PowerPoint?
Exactly.
At the end of the day, if this technology training is going to go away in 6 weeks and there are no jobs and there's no relevant content to your life and it's not in a
And do you have a
language
computer?
even know, you certainly don't have a computer. You probably only have a feature phone that doesn't have any mobile internet capabilities to it. So yes, it's exciting to learn about technology, and then that initiative stops and you're back where you were. And a lot of women that probably need this information the most, weren't allowed to go in the first place, for all the social barriers that we've talked about. So now I think we're at a point. So yes, any good high-tech person that's running the books would say this is not a good effort. We're not getting a lot of return on investment. But what it does take is people like you and me who dig deeper and say, the women really do need this information, but what they need is they don't need to learn how to code, and they don't need to learn how to populate data tables. They need to learn that there are 6 or 7 agriculture and health applications in their language available on the internet. That is not tied to a company or a program or a coding language or employment skills right away, but that, hey, there's this agricultural app that can give you the market prices. And here's an app that can tell you if your goats have rabies or if they just have an upset stomach. That's the difference between culling a herd and waiting a few days. Very, very life and death decisions, life and livelihood related decisions. And that's where you get this sort of relevance gap that I think drives a lot of this gender digital divide, which is that women don't have any idea what's out there. It's not just give them a phone and they'll use it. They have no idea what's even out there to start with because there isn't that sort of awareness building. So I think now when you have an international development industry that is really, really running fast and hard to digitize everything. So, here at USAID, the Global Health Bureau does a lot of applications. The education group does a lot of mobile applications. The agriculture group has moved things to, internet-based because they think this can really be scaled and sustained over large populations, right? If there's an app on a phone, that's easier to reach tons of villages than sending one agricultural extension officer to a bunch of villages. Maybe that person can only reach 20 a year, where this app could reach thousands of villages.
Exactly.
So here's the point then where we need to re-engage and re-educate donors that we really, really need to focus on the gender digital divide now that there's more development content that's available only digitally. And if you have this gap where women can't access it and they're the key to sustainable community development, we need to fix that because now they can't access. It used to be, I can't access a phone so I can't call somebody. Now it's, I can't access information about COVID-19 or Ebola or an incursion by a militia. This is a matter of life and death. So I think we have enough information now on how to effectively close the gender digital divide, working with the power players, working with intelligent user interfaces for illiterate populations. I could go on and on about what actually does work, but that's a heavy lift for technology companies and donors who just want to write an app or who just want to do a training camp. When you say you have to work family by family and you might have to be in there for multiple years, that is a hard thing to tell a technology company that thinks on the quarter and may not even be around in a couple of years. So we really need to build bridges and new education opportunities for donors and funders and technology builders in this space to say, we have some good ways to re-engage, and you have to try this new way or else women will never, ever, ever close this information gap that they could benefit from the most.
So I really see the importance of religious organizations taking part in closing the gender digital divide. I'm United Methodist clergy, and I see how we're organized all over the world, and that if we wanted to come together on one issue, we could absolutely do it through technology, uniting all of us. What are some pointers that you could give for us working? We are interfaith. We're not, Women Arise is not just United Methodist women. We work with Muslim women in Nigeria and other faith traditions around. So what are the pointers that you would like to leave us with today?
I think that's a great question because I think a lot of people don't realize how powerful and influential the faith-based organizations are in international development. They're really the stalwarts because they're the ones that have been around the longest. They have the most trust in communities. I've worked with some that, have been around for, 50, 60 years. It's a family thing where people contribute generation after generation to certain communities, and you see this network of trust be built up. And I think this can be very much extended to an online platform and built up even more because faith, denomination aside, is the common thread through so many of these communities. And when you talk about faith, you're talking about hope, you're talking about aspiration, you're talking about, being a better person and being a better neighbor and, living your right life, not just for you, but for your community and your family. And I think that that's something that, any sort of, that crosses certainly all faiths and bridges a lot of the divides within faiths. I think that it can be difficult sometimes when we get down to actual gender-based issues. So I know that just from my years as a professor with students that were everything from, diehard atheists to, returning LDS missionaries to evangelicals to Muslims to everything, you get on a topic like women's reproductive rights, and that's going to be incredibly contentious, and everybody has an issue, and everybody's right, and everybody's God is right. So I think that we have to make sure that we don't rat hole down conversations that have the tendency to divide us, but really, there's really nothing in anything that stops a conversation around equality and benefit and, building better lives for our families and our kids. And isn't it interesting how we do it in different ways, but fundamentally at the end of the day, it's through sharing correct information, sharing information that's based in values that everybody can agree and care on. And that doesn't water down the issues at all. That just makes it so we can start actually having a dialogue. Like Neelley, you're so welcomed in, you're like global ambassador. You're welcomed in every community I think you've ever even, stepped foot in, and probably a lot that you haven't, because you do understand where to find the commonalities and to build on those. And that's what we have to do with the gender digital divide, is say, look, we may not agree on what women's empowerment actually looks like and how it manifests, and what's appropriate for one community may be incredibly inappropriate for another. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. But let's at least start with the fact that, good information is not just a right or a privilege, it's a lifeline. Okay, yes. Then how do we get that? And, just bring it down to the fundamentals, finding those common pieces. I think connecting women all over the world is incredibly powerful. I think that your story about Gombe is just, it's given me shivers since we've talked, because I can't imagine anything more powerful than being shunned by your community and then seeing that a country on the other side of the world with strangers is like, we love you.
Yeah.
And that, we do more of that. We do that all the time. We do that just, I just think of like the letter writing campaigns that we used to have, like to Amnesty. Now we can move that. That stuff is digital. That stuff is digital now. Think of the letters you used to write to the kids that, like, my school always had a save the children. Every class had a save the child that we
children, yeah.
You write letters, you do that kind of stuff, and now it's just so much easier to build those connections and bridges. And I think now, with the world going through as many kind of dark crises as it is, with the rise of populism, with the fact that gender equality is actually shrinking in a lot of communities because people are kind of battening down the hatches and trying to hold on to power as much as they can. This is the time we have to really get in there and use digital services to the best of our ability to really push an equity agenda. And we can do that across any religion.
True. And it is the thing that brings us together because we all face societal issues the same. We all face disease the same way. We all are subject to violence the same way. We've created these false barriers around us as if my problem is not your problem, is not your problem, when if we really face it together, I think that not only would we address the problems more adequately, we might also find that we build peace along the way.
I think so. I know we're wrapping up, but I think I will use one last example. I have so many hundreds of women now that are connections on WhatsApp that, just have met over the years, that we stay in touch maybe once a month, but that's enough. We share pictures every once in a while. They're all over the place. We don't speak the same language per se, but at the end of the day, between Google Translate and WhatsApp, often I get emails about, is this correct information? There's so much. The problem is, of course, with this wonderful proliferation of devices and technology and connectivity, we do see the fake news, we do see the scams. More women than ever I know have fallen for internet scams because they want to believe that everyone is benevolent. I get a lot of things like, will this treatment really work for my arthritis? I'm told if I bought peanut butter, no, peanut butter is not going to work for you. Maybe it does. Peanut butter is not going to work for your arthritis. Here's what you need instead. And because they don't have the connectivity necessarily to download a Wikipedia page, I can and then paste in little bits about, this is what osteoarthritis is, or this is what fistula is, or this is what measles is, and help with correct content. I can also understand where they're getting the information they are, because that's interesting to me. So who told you that? Oh, well, it's this group from such and such, or it's my mother, or it's my tribal tradition. And it helps you understand where their information base comes from, so that you can go in, and I can go to USAID or or different groups and say, hey, this seems to be an information gap that we could address. So instead of sending information on malaria, which they seem to understand just fine, let's talk about repetitive stress injury from being an underpaid, overworked domestic forever, and what you can do for that. So, I think that we really have a role in helping disseminate true information and accurate information as well, because I also see where, packs, lots of women and one issue can get really blown out of proportion, and bad things can happen.
Mm-hmm. It sure can. It sure can. And I think that what you're doing then, pasting from Wikipedia into WhatsApp, that is where we also lessen the digital divide. I often do that where I'll transfer something to a format that can be distributed through WhatsApp, which I'm doing with this podcast. So the podcast then just goes by audio file to a group of people on WhatsApp who want to receive the podcast. And I think we need more bridges throughout the world, people who are willing to look at, okay, this is how they receive information. How can we put good information into those locations?
And they don't receive information and use the laptops and computers the way that we do, because there's just not that sort of accessibility to it. There's not that kind of availability. So we really have to, I think you're right, we have to be the bridges. We have to close the digital gap before the people actually who are supposed to do it are closing it. We have to set the example.
Yeah. Well, Revi, I just really appreciate all that you're doing for women around the world. I know you've lifted my spirits today, just thinking about the work that you're doing that goes so far beyond the things that I'm seeing in this space. And I am going to list all of your contact information on the website, WomenAriseCollective.org, so that people can find you and find the WomenConnect Challenge. And I want to thank you. And I know that we'll be talking again soon. We'll watch for updates.
Well, Neelley, I'm never as inspired as after I get off a conversation with you in person, on the phone, anything. So thank you for the amazing work you do. I'm so honored to be part of this podcast. Feel free to list my Gmail account for people that want to get in touch directly about these issues, because this is kind of all I do. It's really what I'm passionate about. And if other people have, ideas, thoughts, etc., let's connect.
Oh my gosh, I would love to travel with you to northern Nigeria. We're
anywhere in the world. All right.
Anywhere.
I got to go to Dominican Republic next week. Come with me there.
Okay. Well, we've got a lot more to talk about offline. So thank you again, Revi.
Lots of love to you. Lots of love in the Nashville and Tennessee rebuilding, and take care.
Thanks for listening to the Women Arise podcast. Please be sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss a single episode. For more information or to make a donation to support the efforts of Women Arise, please visit WomenAriseCollective.org.